In 1898, under the heavy political repression of Tsar Nicholas II's rule in the Russian Empire, a small group of activists secretly came together in the city of Minsk to found the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, driven by the goal of overthrowing the Tsar's autocratic government, organizing the working class, and establishing socialism based on the ideas of Karl Marx. However, this early unity did not last long, and just 5 years later, during the Second Party Congress, a major split took place within the movement, dividing the party into two rival factions. One group, led by Vladimir Lenin, held the majority of the party and became known as the Bolsheviks, while the other group, led by Julius Martov, found itself in the minority and came to be known as the Mensheviks. But what exactly were the ideas that separated them, and why did this division occur in the first place? Why do some historians argue that the October Revolution happened too early, and that this premature timing prevented the emergence of an ideal communist society? Stay with me as we break down these questions and explore these ideas in a clear and simple way. In the 1940s, Karl Marx, together with his close collaborator Friedrich Engels, introduced a set of ideas that would later become known as Marxism, a theory that sought to explain history, society, and the forces driving social change. Marx spoke of a historical process in which a workers' revolution would eventually take place, leading to the abolition of private ownership, the disappearance of social classes such as workers, capitalists, and feudal lords, and the creation of a society built on equality and justice. Crucially, Marx did not describe this transformation as a sudden or overnight event, but as a long and inevitable process, one shaped by economic forces and historical development through which humanity was compelled to move toward a classless society. In Marx's view, history itself was pushing society in this direction, not through chance, but through necessity. He began by describing a feudal society, a world largely shaped by rural life, where vast amounts of land were owned by a small group of individuals known as lords, or feudal elites. In feudal societies, the vast majority of agricultural land within a territory was controlled by a small number of feudal lords, and in many cases, even the peasants themselves were treated as part of the land, bound to it by law and tradition, with no freedom to leave or change their social position. These lords were the landed aristocracy, holding not only the land itself, but also the real political power of the state, as decisions, laws, and policies in a feudal system were largely determined by their interests. The wealth of the country, too, was concentrated in their hands, derived almost entirely from their ownership of land, which was the primary source of economic power in a feudal society. Opposing this ruling class was another social group, the peasants, whose lives, along with those of their children, were marked by hardship, poverty, and relentless labor. The structure of feudal society was designed in such a way that peasants could never become feudal lords themselves, as social mobility was virtually impossible, and power passed from one generation of feudal families to the next, ensuring that the children of lords would always inherit their parents' position, designed in such a way that peasants could never become feudal lords themselves, as social mobility was virtually impossible, and power passed from one generation of feudal families to the next, ensuring that the children of lords would always inherit their parents' position. But history, according to Marx, moves forward through unavoidable change, and one of its most decisive moments came with the expansion of cities and the rapid process of industrialization. As societies became more urban and industrial, a new social class emerged, made up of those who owned wealth and capital, and who earned money not through physical labor, but through investment and ownership. This was the class of capitalists, or the bourgeoisie, factory owners, merchants, and bankers, individuals who did not work with their hands, but instead generated income from the capital they controlled. For example, a person might invest money in a factory and earn profit simply through ownership, rather than through manual work. With the growth of urban life, this bourgeois class gradually replaced the feudal lords, becoming the dominant economic force in society, and the primary power shaping political decisions and state policies. This process, in which the bourgeoisie took the place of the feudal aristocracy, became known as the bourgeois revolution. Yet this transformation also gave rise to a new opposing class, the working class, or the proletariat. People who owned no significant wealth of their own and could survive only by selling their labor, earning money through physical work rather than through capital. In Marx's view, this new conflict between bourgeoisie and proletariat would define the next stage of history. With the continued expansion of urban life and the advance of industrialization, the wealth of the bourgeoisie steadily increases, while the rights and wages of workers are increasingly undermined. Yet, at the same time, another process unfolds. The proletariat gradually becomes more aware of the exploitation it faces. Its numbers continue to grow, and workers begin to organize themselves into stronger and more disciplined political movements. This process continues until it reaches a breaking point, when workers rise up against the bourgeoisie, overthrow their power, and take control of society in what Marx described as a proletarian revolution. In this new system, factories no longer belong to private owners. Instead, they are owned and managed by the workers themselves, and the profits are shared collectively among them. In simple terms, Marx's theory describes a clear historical sequence. First, feudalism is replaced by capitalism through a bourgeois revolution, and then capitalism itself is overthrown through a proletarian revolution, leading to the establishment of a socialist system. This, according to Marx, is not a matter of choice, but a historical process driven by necessity. Now, let us turn to the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks. At the time, nearly 80% of Russia was still governed by feudal relations, and capitalist society had not yet developed to any significant degree, leaving the country economically and socially far behind Western Europe. The Mensheviks, following what they believed to be the classical interpretation of Marxist theory, argued that history had to move in stages, and that feudalism must first be dismantled and replaced by a bourgeois, capitalist system before any genuine socialist revolution could take place. For them, socialism was not a sudden rupture, but a long-term process, one that required the establishment of a democratic capitalist system as a necessary foundation. They therefore called for the creation of a constitution, a parliament, political freedoms, the legalization of political parties, and universal suffrage, believing that only through these reforms could Russia prepare itself for a future socialist transformation. From this perspective, a socialist revolution in Russia was not only premature, but historically unsound. For this reason, the Mensheviks were often described as reformists, a label reflecting their belief in gradual change rather than immediate revolutionary upheaval. The Bolsheviks, however, called for an immediate socialist revolution without waiting for the full development of a capitalist system. Yet they faced a fundamental problem. The working class in Russia was neither large enough nor sufficiently organized to carry out such a revolution on its own. To overcome this, the Bolsheviks adopted a different strategy, one based on an alliance between workers and peasants, uniting industrial labor with the vast rural population of Russia. This idea was symbolized in their imagery, most notably through the hammer and the sickle, representing the unity of workers and peasants. From this point on, the Bolsheviks intensified their revolutionary struggle, publishing large numbers of illegal newspapers and pamphlets, organizing underground networks, and adopting increasingly radical tactics, including armed actions against state institutions. It was this combination of ideology, organization, and revolutionary activism that ultimately distinguished the Bolsheviks from their Menshevik rivals. On the other hand, the Mensheviks pursued a broad strategy of recruitment, seeking to attract members from the widest possible sections of society, even if those individuals were not actively involved in revolutionary activity. Ranging from intellectuals and workers to ordinary citizens. The Bolsheviks, by contrast, insisted on recruiting only highly committed and disciplined members, individuals who were prepared to show absolute loyalty, take up arms if necessary, and directly confront state and military institutions. In essence, the Bolsheviks favored the creation of a smaller, more professional, and tightly organized revolutionary force, believing that effectiveness and discipline mattered more than sheer numbers, while the Mensheviks preferred large, inclusive organizations built on mass participation. This fundamental difference in organization and strategy would prove decisive in the years that followed. History moved forward, and with their radical approach, the Bolsheviks ultimately defeated not only their Menshevik rivals, but also the Tsarist regime itself. In doing so, they pushed the world into a new historical era, one in which revolutionary groups across the globe drew inspiration from their success and turned toward radical and revolutionary paths of their own, from China to Cuba and far beyond. Yet this story also raises a deeper and more personal question. Have you ever designed a plan in your own life, one that looked perfect on paper, but once put into action, turned into a complete failure? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in this episode. Please make sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Stay tuned for our next episode. We have more stories and insights coming your way. See you later.